Hey, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in to what is now the third episode of Me and All My Friends. Today, I am delighted to have one of my good friends. She's a songstress from Gunnedah, New South Wales, Australia. She has recently released a new single by the name of Tennessee because she's actually been living in Nashville, Tennessee for the past few years, writing there. Her new single, Tennessee, has been streamed over 130,000 times to date. She has had 3 top 10 singles in the Australian country charts. She's been nominated for 2 CMAA Golden Guitar Awards. She's also had a top 10 ARIA charting album, which I believe is equivalent to the Billboard charts over in the US with her album White Flag. She's had songs recorded by artists in Australia, North America, the UK, Ireland. She is one of the hardest working people that I know, and she's one of my very favorite people to collaborate with when she's not so busy and she can actually slot me into her very, very busy schedule. Please give a warm welcome to my friend, Katrina Burgoyne.
Hey mate, how are ya?
Doing pretty good. How about you?
This is fun. This is gonna be cool. I'm
Yeah,
excited.
I think it should be a lot of fun. I should say as well from the outset of this, for anyone who isn't familiar with Katrina at all, she's an incredible artist in her own right, but she also does a bunch of writing for other people. If you want to go and check out some of her music, you can search for Katrina Burgoyne on Spotify and all the major digital streaming platforms, or you can head over to her website, which is kbcountry.net. She said that it's kbcountry.net because nobody can spell Burgoyne, and that's perfectly understandable. So head over to her website, kbcountry.net, and you'll find out all of her stuff that she's been involved with and all of her new releases that she's coming out with over the next year or so. So I guess to get started in the whole thing, Katrina, I'm delighted to have you on. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to sit down and chat with me. So just tell us a little bit about yourself. How did this whole crazy journey in music start for you, and how did you end up moving from a small little town called Gunnedah in Australia to Nashville, Tennessee, the home of country music?
Well, I grew up with a grandfather that used to sing country music, just at home, or like he'd play some gigs and stuff around town, and he used to sit me on his knee, wrap the guitar around me, and play some Hank Williams. And one of our favorite songs was "Me and Bobby McGee," and he was just so inspiring. And as a little girl, I was drawn to music, so if someone was playing, I'd be front row and center and dancing. All these videos, I used to videotape me because I would be embarrassingly dancing, like not good kind of dancing. But I picked up the guitar when I was about 11 years old, because my family, we'd go on trips once a year. We'd take 2 weeks out of the year, or one year we took a month out, and we'd go into the outback of Australia and travel and camp on the side of the road. And I used to always think, how cool would it be if I had a guitar and could sing around a campfire? And so it started as that. But by the time I could play and sing, we no longer spent our weekends going to, camping. We would then go to country music talent quests and country music events. So I was very blessed to have incredibly supportive parents. My mom, she is an incredible mum. She used to make sure every opportunity I could have, she'd take me there and give me a good shot. And my mum is one of those people that I'd say, "This is what I want to do. I would love to do this." And she said, "Well, what's your plan? How are you going to do it?" And that's how it's always been. So for me, I always thought the sky was the limit. If I could think it and make it happen, I could make it. If I had a strategy, I could make it happen. And so I was about 15 years old, and someone said to me, "I imagine you being a songwriter in Nashville." So someone planted the seed when I was 15 years old. And so it took me a while. I came out in 2009, and I was fortunate enough to have had someone connect to me. I had meetings with every major label in town here in Nashville at that point. And I look back and I think, oh my gosh, I was just a little fresh girl, didn't know much really.
I
And I
know,
had
I
all
know that it's
these.
horribly, I know that it's horribly inappropriate to ask a woman her age, but I'm gonna kind of work it backwards here, and I'm gonna ask, how old were you during that first trip to Nashville
I
in
was
2009?
just 21. I waited till I was 21 before I came out here,
Okay.
because I knew I wasn't going to be able to get into bars. So I was just 21, and I I had meetings with Universal, quite a few meetings with Universal Music Publishing. They had me in writing with their writers. Um, EMI. I had meetings with lots of people. Anyway, so I remember the head of Universal Publishing at the time said, "Grow where you're planted," and that was one thing that I was said, grow where you're planted. But then I also did a songwriting workshop with a gentleman called Daryl Scott. I don't know if you know who Daryl Scott is.
Yeah, incredible
So
writer.
he wrote Long Time Gone, Born to Fly, he wrote a lot of hits. You'll Never Leave Harlan Alive. And he listened to my songs and was critiquing my songs. And he said, I never say this to anyone. He goes, it's, everyone wants to move to Nashville. He says, I normally tell people to sort of, grow where they're planted, you know, stay where you are first until you outgrow it. He goes, but I see a lot of potential in your writing. I think you should really consider moving to Nashville. But, I think honestly, something that I really struggle with is self-worth and thinking I'm good enough. So I came out with a guitarist at the time, and we were going to, the Time Jumpers and all these incredible musicians that like in a different league than me. I'm just sitting on my guitar writing songs. I'm a songwriter. So I didn't really go to the songwriting things except for the Bluebird Cafe. Back then in that time, you could just walk in and see hit writers, and there was always a spare seat in the house,
Not anymore, guys. You got to book ahead of time.
Not anymore. Like, I think I've been there twice. Actually, I've played twice. No, I've only been there twice since I moved here 4 years ago. You just can't get in. And it's also not really the place to go and listen to songwriters anymore. But back in the day, it was the place to go. And I remember thinking, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. So I went home to Australia, and not just that, it was a different scene back then. 10 years ago, it was a different scene. So I went back home to Australia, and I ended up recording an album at home and, grow where you're planted. So I was really fortunate enough to, I got 3 top 10 singles from that album, and I went top 10 on the ARIA chart. And I think it's the Australian Record Industry. I don't know what that ARIA stands for, but it's equivalent to Billboard. And so got top 10 on the country ARIA chart, and then got nominated for 2 Golden Guitar Awards, which is awesome. And, I remember sitting there, and I think I went through like a quarter life crisis, to be honest. I remember sitting there, and because I had such low self-esteem, I remember sitting at the awards being nominated, and I think I was meant to be happy. Like, this was meant to make me happy to be nominated for this. So I kind of took a step back from music for a little bit, and I did some self-discovery, I guess you could say. I really essentially broke down to kind of rebuild who I am as a person and try and find some strength and some belief in myself. I think my belief really weighted on awards or accolades or people telling me that I was good enough rather than me believing I was good enough. And it's so funny because I went through depression, and I came out the other end of it, and I recorded and filmed all of that Nashville trip. And I look back later on in life, and I look back at that young little girl, I think, wow, she was so brave. I looked at her with admiration. Whereas when I was in the moment, I thought I was not good enough. I'm not, but I look back and I go, she was and I look at it as a third person, like she was such a brave young thing doing this, So I came back out, and my producer back home in Australia, who I came out with in 2009, he came out. He was touring with a girl called Casey Chambers. I don't know if she's well known in Ireland. You would love her, by the way. He was touring the US with Casey Chambers, and he got to Nashville, and he came home and he said to me, Katrina, Nashville's changed. When I was there, I just couldn't help thinking that you need to be here. And it was like he planted the seed again. So that was in 2011. And I went through my little quarter life crisis, and I got out of the other end of it. And was 2014 when I said, I'm going to go to Nashville. And, you know, I'm a full-time musician, and the Australian dollar doesn't get you too far in America. So it was always like, how am I going to make this happen? You know, I had a car loan that I was paying with all my expenses. It was, how could I make this happen? So I ended up having a few drinks one night, Warren. Can you believe it?
I can't believe that an Aussie girl like yourself, Katrina, would ever partake of a few drinks of the alcoholic poison.
Now, and you know, you've known me in my single life, and my luck with men is not very lucky. You also know I'm not much of a flirter either. I don't really flirt with boys. I'm more just the mate, you
I don't
know.
know.
Like,
I would say, considering that handsome gentleman you've managed to bag yourself, Katrina, you must be doing something right.
I think I figured it out in the end, but um, you know, I went out one night, and I used to go out to like clubs and whatever, and I looked like a little like Sandra D, I guess, from Greece. You know, like I was always the goody two shoes. Like guys didn't want to talk to me because they'd have to put in work and probably take me on a few dates, and you know. So I remember going out to the club one night. It was one of the first times I ever went like night clubbing, and I had never experienced men feeling like it was okay to come up and dance right on me and like touch me. And I was like, what is this? So I ended up leaving very intoxicated still, but like, what is.
Was this in Nashville? Are you talking about a night you went nightclubbing in Nashville?
No, by Nashville, I had a lot of more experience. No, actually, Nashville's kind of different because downtown bar's Broadway. It's like a big country
Yeah,
town with
it's
lots
not
of
like
people.
clubbing. It's very hard to find a nightclub in a lot of the US, quite honestly, not even just Nashville, but
Yeah, wow. I didn't. Well, I don't go clubbing, but you know, yeah, it was a club, like a nightclub, and it was not my scene at all. So, and I had been like, I was in a relationship always, like in my adult life until I was about 26 years old. So I was single for the first time in my adult life, and I went out clubbing and I experienced this, and I went home and I saw a Facebook ad pop up, or a Facebook post pop up saying, and I can briefly, like, only barely remember it. I was pretty intoxicated. And it said, apply for the Bachelor. So
oh wow.
I,
So that's how you ended up in The Bachelor, was you were drunk one night, you came home from a nightclub, you saw an ad to apply for The Bachelor Australia.
yeah, on Facebook in my drunken state. And I'm like, oh, I'll apply for this. Anyway, so I was drunk and applied for it. And I woke up hungover, like probably 11 a.m. in the morning.
And
And
they're like,
I checked my,
congratulations, you've won the show.
congratulations. We would love for you to come in and apply and audition for this role on The Bachelor. So
Wow.
I'm like, I don't even, like, did not even, you know, it's like one of those things that you don't even remember doing it. But then when something reminds you the next day, you're like, oh, I did do that. Oh, okay. And you know, like there's some things in your life where you just have a knowing, like you just know things are going to happen. You just know. So, and it's so interesting. Like I remember, and for example, there's competitions that I've won or awards that I've won, and I just know that I was going to win them. And I wasn't even nervous. It just was like, oh yeah, I'm just coming to get my award, and not in an egotistical way, but it was just like I just knew. I knew that I was going to be on The Bachelor. It was a knowing thing. It was weird. And I remember walking into the room for the audition, and the whole room stopped and looked at me. And I wish I'd make that kind of impact on a regular day-to-day basis. That would be great. Like most times, like I walk into like a supermarket, and the electronic doors don't even recognize me to open. So, so to have this kind of impact when I walked in the room was but I just knew I was going to be on it. So I'm not sure if like that energy was intimidating for the women, and they just go, oh, you know, I was the only one in the audition that got on the show. And I walked in the room, the whole room stopped talking and looked at me, and they just watched me walk inside. It was a weird thing.
What were
But
you
anyway,
doing?
I just walked in the room to sign up while, like, I had to sign up and say I'm here. And all the girls were kind of waiting before we went into the audition. And so the audition was all the girls like stood around in a circle at one point, and the woman held up a rose and she said, "Who wants it?" and threw it into the middle of the circle. And the girls went crazy. And they're all like, and I just kind of stood there. And I stood there, and the one girl got the rose, and she says, "Well, why do you think you deserve the rose?" And she says, "Well, my last boyfriend, he actually had a family that I didn't know about, and a double life. And I think that I deserve a really good man, and I deserve the opportunity to be on The Bachelor." Anyway, then the woman said, "Does anyone think that they deserve it more than this girl?" And I don't know. I just kind of felt like, yeah, I deserve it more than her. She said, no. She says, "Does anyone else think that they deserve it more than her? This girl, go take the rose and tell us why." So no one else moved. And because I didn't chase it. I didn't run in and get I just stood there. And then when it comes to taking the rose, I went and took the rose off her. And they said, "Why do you deserve this?" I said, "Because I've gotten to the point where I've closed the doors on my past relationship. I've healed myself from people like that. And I'm too awesome to be this single."
Very good.
So I know, right? The moment of confidence that I had. So anyway, I went on The Bachelor, and I've learned, like, I thought I was really outgoing. I thought that I was like extroverted and like totally like the center of attention all the time. I think from being on stage and being the center of attention on stage. And in that show, I learned that I'm actually really introverted. And at the time, I was still dealing with my depression. I was healing from I was pretty much this, I was healed from my depression, but I was still dependent on medication at the time. And so here I am, had just gone through 2 years of learning to like who I was, medicated, going on national television for Australia to judge me. Idiot. So, and I was the only one medicated in the house. And when I went in the house, I realized that all women feel insecure, that all women feel exactly the way I do. Like, this is a normal feeling to feel not good enough. It's a normal feeling to not like who you are. And it's just learning ways to manage and cope with that, or accepting it, And I think in our 20s, everyone is still trying to figure out how to accept who they are. But it became overwhelming for me to be surrounded by 30 women and big personalities. Like, I'm not that big of a personality. I love my alone. I love one-on-one times. You know what I mean? I love connecting with people, but I don't like the whole, like, I can perform and entertain people and do that, but when I'm not on stage in my element, I don't need to be the joker. I don't need to be the comedian, that gets all the attention. And I don't need that. So I found myself, I took my guitar in with me, and I found myself sitting in the courtyard by myself writing songs for the first time in about 18 months. Like, I probably had written 3 or 4 songs in 18 months. And I felt inspired for the first time. And I was journaling, and I felt a calling bigger than me, saying, it was kind of like, if I could get through this and feel proud of the person I am, I'm going to come off my medication, and I'm going to go to the USA for 3 months and live in Nashville for 3 months and see if I want to move there. So I did. I was so disciplined. I don't know how I was so disciplined, but I became, wrapped up in this idea. And it's so funny. Like, it was like I got off the show in June, and by August I got an email, and by that point I was mostly focusing on my medication. I had just come off my medication, which is the toughest thing I think I'd done.
So this is antidepressants you're talking about being on?
Yeah. So I came off it, and I came off it alone. I didn't have anyone in my life. I just remember the grief and it was like I was shedding so much of my life. I had a moment. I was engaged once upon a time, and we were together for 7 years or 6 years. And when I got unengaged, my dad didn't understand. He didn't approve of me leaving my partner. And my dad and I had troubles. And so not only did I lose my fiance, who was my best friend, my dad and I actually cut ties. Were we weren't even in contact for 5 years. Wow. So it was kind of like I went through this big loss in my life of men in my life, you know. So I just kind of had to rebuild myself and all that. So I remember being in my little apartment. It was like I was renting a room, and it was like a downstairs dungeon. It was like brick walls either side. It was a teeny tiny space. It was the first time I'd lived independently, completely by myself. And I remember looking out the window and looking up at the moon. It was a full moon when I was going through this. And I remember just looking up the moon and dealing with this grief, just crying. And I never felt pain like that. It was weird just to come off this medication. But it was funny. It's like the month after that, I always say it's so divine. I was so called to be here. But after that, I ended up getting an email from a publisher here in Nashville saying, "Hey, Katrina." Actually, it was a songwriter. "Hey, Katrina, you probably don't remember me, but we wrote a song back in 2009 when you were here. And I just wanted to tell you that we got it cut. We got a song cut by a band that is getting produced by a Grammy Award winner producer. And it was just kind of like a random stroke of luck. But I think it was more so a sign. I go, oh my gosh, there's my son. I have to go to Nashville. I got off my medication. There was my son. That was like years after, you know, like it was 2009 that happened. It was 2014 by the time I got the email of a cut. And I'm like, wow, okay, there's my son. I have to go to Nashville. So I ended up saving up for a year, and I put everything into storage, moved out of my little apartment I lived in, and because I couldn't afford rent and being in Nashville as well. So I moved out here for 3 months, and it was a 3-month trip. And you know the story. You come out, you don't have a work visa, you can't work. So I used to walk 6 miles to and from a co-write with my guitar on my back and my computer in my hand. I used to walk down West End Avenue all the way from Sylvan Park up like past the 440. And I used to think about it. Like I was broke. I ate toast for 3 weeks, put on a whole dress size. I wouldn't recommend it. I used to walk in that heat. It was like 100 degrees, and my sandals, the glue would melt on my sandals. And I would get home and the glue would be melted, and I'd re-glue them every day. But I couldn't afford Ubers. Like it just was costing so much to Uber that I couldn't sustain, you know, I'd Uber sometimes, but I just couldn't sustain, like at nighttime. If I'm out at a show, I'd Uber home. But I think if I could walk, I'll walk, because I can't afford, this ain't going to last me 3 months, you know? So I came out and I got back home to Australia. I called my mother and I said, "Hey mum, can you put $100 in my account so I can pay for enough gas to get home?" So she helped me get home from the Sydney airport. It's a 6-hour drive. And I, you know, started the journey all over again. It took me 14 months to make it happen, to move out to Nashville. And I moved out here with 3 suitcases, a guitar, and $15,000 to start my life from scratch. And, you know, the health insurance was like $2,500 to send my body home if I died. That was what it covered. So I thought, if I've since canceled that health insurance. So in future, if anything was to happen to me, please donate to my GoFundMe account if they need to send my body home.
You're gonna be stuck in Nashville.
I know, right? Yeah. So anyway, that was a very long-winded way of how I got to Nashville. But yeah, here I am. I've been here for 4 years now, and it feels like home. And thank God it does. It feels like home now. So it would have been a really tough last 12 months if it didn't.
I don't think that I've actually mentioned this on the show as of yet in any of the previous episodes I've done. But the reason that I call this podcast "Me and All My Friends" is that it's a lyric that's taken from one of my favorite artists, a guy called John Mayer. And in one of his songs, he's got a lyric in the song Waiting for the World to Change that says, "Me and all my friends, we're all misunderstood. They say we stand for nothing and there's no way we ever could." And I just thought I had this idea for the podcast for a long time of just getting people that I knew, people like you, Katrina, that I really respect and admire, that I've gotten to know over the years. And I understand the struggle that so many of us kind of go through in either dealing with self-worth issues like you're talking about, or just in like struggling to pay your bills or whatever it is. All of us kind of encounter this struggle. And the funny thing is that for many people on the outside looking in, they look at us as entertainers and as songwriters and artists, and all they really get to see is the glamour. And they don't get to see the behind the scenes. They don't get to see that struggle or understand the story and how hard it is to get to that point of glitz and glamour. And even when you do get to that point of glitz and glamour, like you're saying, you were at the ARIA Awards and you were sitting there thinking, you know, this is supposed to make me happy. This is what I've always wanted, and this is supposed to have made me happy. And yet there is still that feeling of emptiness within you. And I think just on a human level, that's such an interesting thing to encounter and to hear. And in particular, I'm really curious to hear more about the fact that you say you struggled for so long with your sense of self-worth, because I can relate to that very much myself. I know in chatting to a whole bunch of other artists that a lot of us face the exact same thing. We always feel like we're imposters. We suffer from imposter syndrome. We feel like a lot of the time we're not good enough, or we're never going to be good enough. And yet, in a story like yours, in a journey like yours, it's so interesting how you say you struggled with depression, you struggled with your own sense of self-worth, and yet you managed to have 3 top 10 singles in the Australian charts. You managed to be nominated for 2 CMAA awards. You managed to have a top 10 ARIA album in Australia. You've managed to have songs cut by people all over the world, and yet you still don't feel good enough. Sometimes, maybe you don't, maybe you do at this very moment in time, but a lot of the time you struggle with that sense of like, oh, well, I know I'm getting songs cut around the world, but I wish I could get something with a major Nashville country artist and I could get a Billboard hit or whatever it is. Like, we're all kind of striving after something more. And no matter how much we actually achieve along the way, sometimes it's so hard to see beyond what we're striving for next, you know?
Yeah. Well, I always think that we all do have a purpose, right? We all do have, or a challenge. And I think the older I'm getting, the more I realize that everyone feels like that. And it's kind of like you have to be the braver one to stick your neck out, because you're in a sea of people that feel the same way. So if you want to stand out, be the brave person to say, hey, but the thing is too, is that, okay, so for example, I always find that the most talented people that I have so much respect for, like people that I really admire, are normal, that are so incredibly talented that I wish I had the talent that's just in their little pinky finger. I don't even equate to, my abilities don't equate to that. I always find that they are more humble and more like, no, I've got to be better. Because there's a, you're always pushing yourself. Like as a songwriter, as a singer, as an artist, as a performer, I've got to be better. I've got to keep growing. And I think that there is something to be said. Like Nashville's very much a town of like a lot of imposters. I shouldn't say that, but like Nashville's very much a town of like, you go out and people will tell you how good they are. And I don't know if it's like a way, if it's a culture thing, because and for a while I thought it was a culture thing. I think Americans, and I feel so very blessed to be in this country, but I do think, from where I'm
Don't
from,
play it
like,
safe, Katrina. Tell us exactly what you think about the American people.
Okay, so from where I'm from is that like my family didn't have anything. Like my mother didn't ever get an inheritance. Her father didn't ever get an inheritance. we don't have generations and generations of wealth, basically what I'm saying. And so I look at the privilege of an American kid that their parents would pay for their college. If I went to college, my government would pay for it and then I'd pay it back. But also too, I lived 3 hours away from the closest university. So I would also have to pay my board, figure out how I could pay my own way through college. Whereas here, it's kind of like a rite of passage, it's like they're entitled to go to college. And there's a lot of entitlement in this country due to the privilege in this country by being born American, and not everyone. I'm not saying not everyone does that, but I will say a lot of the kids in Nashville that I found, I've got this song called The Next Big Thing. And I went into a bar one day and this guy was telling me how great he is and what he does. And I'm Australian. And I know you guys think the same way in the UK. It's just like, sit down and shut up. Like, show us your words, show us how good you are, but probably don't say it. It's the tall poppy syndrome. You cut them down if they puff their chest out too much. You go, hey, you're getting too big for your boots, mate. You humble them,
Just touching upon that, I do remember one year that we went down together. I think it was the first year that I ever went to the Key West Songwriters Festival.
Oh, yeah, I've only gone one time. It was with you.
Yeah. So it was the first year that I was there, and I was there. You were there. Our good friend Josh Wilcuts was there, who I interviewed in the podcast a couple of episodes before you. And I remember we went to an ASCAP party.
Oh, I'm nervous.
I was pretty. No, you don't need to be nervous. It's more so me needs to be nervous. But
Eli's barking. Stop. That's my dog.
That's your puppy.
My big German Shepherd.
Your big German Shepherd making a big fuss.
No.
Yeah, I remember being at this ASCAP party, and I remember being introduced to one of the girls who was like a rep for ASCAP. Now, ASCAP, for anyone who doesn't know, there are a bunch of performing rights organizations throughout the world that exist. Here in the UK, we have PRS for music. In Ireland, we have IMRO. I can't remember what Australia uses or what the... APRA. So Australia has APRA. There's basically at least one performing rights organization within each country. In the United States, I think there's 3 or 4 possibly. And one of those 3 or 4 PROs that exists in the United States is a company called ASCAP, and they administer everybody's copyrights and they look after the royalties that come in from streaming platforms and film and TV syncs and all of those different things. They're the people that really look after the majority of the money that songwriters end up getting into their bank accounts. So we were at this party, this private party for ASCAP, and someone introduced me to one of the kind of head reps who had organized the whole party. And I remember I was there with you and I was there with Josh. And I went up to this girl whenever I was introduced to her. I went up to this girl and I turned around to her and drunkenly said, you see the 3 of us, we need to be with ASCAP because in a couple of years' time, 3 of us are going to be 3 of the biggest songwriters in the United States. And you turned around to me, you were fucking mortified. And you turned around to me and you were like, doesn't matter if you think that, you don't say that. And I was like, you know what, Katrina, I believe that. So I'm going to say it because I'm drunk and I'm going to say what I want to say. But I always remember the fact that you pulled me on that, and you outright came out and said that. You said, you don't say your worth, you show your worth. And that always stuck with me. And aside from the times when I have gotten horribly drunk and told people that I think I'm the dog's bollocks or the bee's knees
I think you are the bee's knees, so it's all good. The dog's bollocks.
Yes, but I normally don't go out of my way to say that I'm anything special. Most of the time I struggle with my own self-worth and I don't think that I'm anything special. But just on that particular occasion, I thought it was quite funny that one of the few times that I had the confidence to turn around to somebody and say, I'm going to be one of the biggest songwriters in the world. And this is my friend Katrina, and this is my other friend Josh, and we're going to be the biggest songwriters in the world. And you were just like, don't say it, don't say it. And it was like one of those moments where you're talking about whenever you went in for the Bachelor and you kind of obviously walked into the room with that level of confidence, being like, I just know I'm going to get this. Like, I don't need to like show anybody I'm going to get this. I just know deep down, like, this is meant for me and it's going to happen. And I think in those times, like hearing you talk about people in Nashville, I think a lot of times when you get people who kind of exaggerate or go on about how wonderful they are and how much they've accomplished and all of that stuff, I think from my own experience, I've realized that the only times I actually feel the need to do that are the times when my self worth feels like it needs reaffirming.
Yeah,
So
he's right.
sometimes I might think that I'm not good enough, but if I just project out into the world, it's that like law of attraction thing. If you just project out into the world what it is that you want or how good it is you want to be, then it's going to make you that good. And I think to some
Yeah.
degree, it's there is truth in that, but there's also a lot to be said about like that quiet confidence and being able to walk into things and say, you know what, I am good enough for this, but I don't need to tell people that I am.
Yeah.
I don't need to
That's
actually say it
interesting.
in order for it to be seen.
Well, I think, there's that theory. Let me ask you, hey, Steve, what's that theory of when you think you're good enough, but you're actually really not? Dunning-Kruger effect,
Okay.
where it's just like, okay, so people that are intelligent enough to know, like, okay, it takes, when you first, okay, I love photography, for example. So when I first started doing photography, I surprised myself with how good these photos were, right? That sounds so
Like these
egotistical,
photos
but,
are the best photos anyone's
but,
ever
but
taken.
yeah, no, not necessarily that, but I was more so like, wow, I can take, for the first time, I actually got a photo that was like, wow, I could potentially, I'm a photographer now. Like I could probably start charging for these photos, right? And it was because I didn't know any better. It's because I didn't know that, oh, my technique wasn't great here, or I could work on this. It was like with my knowledge, what I knew and my knowledge, I thought I knew everything. I knew everything because I didn't know anything, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
when you're wise enough or educated enough to know, for example, with music, I've been doing it for so long. I probably thought I was really great when I was 11 or 12. I think because I started so young, I had my moment of feeling great. And trust me, I got humbled too. I'm sure I told people I was great, and I'm sure throughout school, you know, shut up, Katrina, you sing country music. You know what I mean? Or even things of me saying, I'm going to move to Nashville one day. I was 15 years old when I started telling people that. And I had people roll their eyes at me it took me over 10 years to make that happen. And I had people roll their eyes at me, and there's that little thing in you that dies when someone rolls their eyes at you. And you're like, oh, you question yourself, maybe I won't. And you're kind of also affecting your own belief in that, what you're saying, right? So I always think that, but I do think it's that the Dunning Kruger effect. I used to walk down in Midtown all the time, and people would tell me how they're going to get a publishing deal in June. I think, mate, you have not made a single dollar from music. You're telling me you're going to get a publishing deal, and here I am. And maybe it's a little jealousy because I would never be brave enough to say that, and I would never think that. Like I wouldn't openly say I wouldn't openly say my goals. I wouldn't say, oh, I'm going to win I'm going to be nominated for a CMA award in 2 years' time. I would never say that out loud, um, mostly for the eye rolls, and mostly because I think for me also too, my moods and my belief kind of come with a season or with a week. I might have a moment of feeling I could do this, or I could email that person and say, hey, I'm Katrina and you should really listen to my music. I think you'd really like it. I think you connect. But most times I'll be like, oh no, I'll just wait till we cross paths, or I'll kind of try and humbly do it, which probably is the long way around. But it is. And I think too, also too, and I don't know if it's interesting, and I'll tell you, I've got an incredible man in my life, and one reason why I fell in love with him is because he's so humble. Like I didn't even know he did music. Like you probably didn't even know he did any music, right? Until we discovered that he did music. So he didn't really share much. We went on our first date and he never mentioned that he played music. And I went to his house on the second date and he said, do you want to see my studio? And I was like, what of? And he goes, oh, my, for music? And so I saw his studio. I was like, oh, wow. And then we dated for a year and a half. And then COVID happened, lockdown happened. And Steve's like, well, why don't I produce a record for you? And I was like, do you know how to produce a record? I didn't know. He'd just jam out on weekends. He'd never share his music with me. He'd just jam on weekends. And now he produces my music. He produces my music videos. And there's something, you know, it's almost like there's something to be said from not always having to feel like you have to be a salesperson. Yeah, I don't buy that shit. And I'm kind of like, I'll walk away. What would I say? I'd go, oh, they're a wanker. That's what I would say, wouldn't I? We'd walk away and I'd go, he talks shit. Sorry, he talks shit.
In fairness to me, I think in that particular situation where we were at that ASCAP party, I don't think that the girl rolled her eyes at me. I think she was pretty petrified of me because, you know, obviously you've been around me whenever I've been drunk, and sometimes I can get pretty passionate. Sometimes I say sometimes, what I really mean is all the time I can get very passionate. And so in getting very passionate, I can also seem quite aggressive in the way that I put things across. And so I don't think the girl was rolling her eyes at me necessarily
No,
when
I
I
don't
told
think
her
she was.
when I told her that I was going to be one of the biggest songwriters in the world. I think she just was really keen to get away from me because she was probably a little frightened for her life, to be honest.
Well, and it's one of those things like, you know, when you said it that night, it wasn't like I walked away from you and go, oh my gosh, I rolled my eyes at you.
What a wanker.
What a wanker. It
What a
wasn't
wanker.
like that. Because, you know, I know you. Well, for one, I know you. But two, it's a different approach. Like you could, you know, you're a little happy and you were like, the way you are, I think it's just your nature. And that's probably why you and I connected so quickly. I think
you're being kind, Katrina. I think the only reason that I pulled it back.
I remember you put your arm around her and you guys were having a chat and
That's why she was scared, because I had my arm around her. That's why she was petrified.
So funny. So funny.
I think you're being kind, though. I think the only reason that I pulled it back was because I found you later that night crying on a sidewalk somewhere. On your phone back to Australia. You were pretty smashed. I think I went out of my way. Both Josh and I went out of our way to make sure that we got you back to the apartment or whatever safe. I think that probably pulled it back more than anything, because up until then you were probably thinking, "Who's this wanker?"
Yeah, who's this wanker? You know, pretty funny. You know, I'm a pretty strong, independent woman, and I think about like you come into my life, and instantly, because I'm pretty introverted. So if for a person to befriend someone, it's normally the other person has to go, Katrina, come out. You used to invite me out all the time, right? And I'd be like, okay, all right, I got nowhere else to be. So, you know, you became one of my first true mates in Nashville, even though you don't even live in Nashville. But I think I met you seriously like 2 weeks after moving to Nashville, 3 weeks after. It was really soon. And, you know, it's just funny. It's like I've realized that I'm a pretty strong independent woman, but I've learned that I need to have big brothers and I need to have men in my life to surround me and protect me. And you and Josh, Josh and Alex have been my protectors, you know, up until I met Steve, of course. But
the dark horse that is the Steve Kinney.
The dark horse that is the Steve Kinney. So it's just funny that all the way over the other side of the world, I can still find my people. And I think that also keeps me grounded, you know, going through that phase, particularly too, you know, that night, you know, you've seen me at my worst 100%. I don't think anyone has ever seen me. Steve has never even seen me like that. All right, I was just grieving a breakup. It was very dramatic. I was drunk.
I remember you were just plastered over the sidewalk. You were like,
I was a mess. So that night, I remember walking and I remember trying to find my way home. And I was by myself. I don't know why I ended up by myself. And then some guy came up to me and goes, you want to kind of, just on the street talking, you want to come smoke some weed by the water? I'm like, I don't really smoke weed. And then I remember texting you and Josh and trying to, in my drunken state, or calling or whatever. And I think Josh and I had just met by that point. He kept calling me Christina. He thought my name was Christina.
That's right.
Remember that? Christina. And that was the first time. Josh's, like, his experience with his life story is fascinating and it blows me away. But he has this, like, I think him growing up in a community, he has such a community spirit, and he's like he has been one of those people that has always shown up whenever, and always since that moment he's always been the person that's shown up or happens to message me right when I really need a friend. Like he's the dude that's like, just thinking of you, just making sure you're all right. I'm like, I remember one night I was, the first 2 years of Nashville were really hard for me living here. Financially, just that feeling of like not having anything to fall back on. My parents aren't wealthy at all. My dad drives Uber in Sydney. If you ever need an Uber in Sydney, my dad might give you a lift. He'll tell you about his daughter in Nashville.
Can we get like a recommendation link that I can put into the description
Yeah,
of
I
the
wish,
video?
right? I don't know how that works, but so like, my dad, I grew up at 15 years old. My dad had a successful business and he went through bankruptcy. So he kind of started his life from scratch all over again. And my mother has done the same thing. So financially, not she hasn't gone through bankruptcy, but divorces and starting from scratch. And so financially, like my we're just a basic middle of the class family. We didn't really have anything. So like, but in particularly when I moved out here, my mum just built a house and she was investing her money in like landscaping the house. Anything extra she had was to get this house up and running. And I knew that she was stressed out financially as well. She was kind of pretty much done as much as she could, And so I didn't really have anyone to turn to or ask for money or anything. And so I just kind of kept plodding along, making it happen. But it was stressful. It was so stressful to not ever have a safety net of anything. And the second year here, and also too, navigating it is a different culture here in the USA than what I'm used to. But navigating that, trying to find my people. I was blessed that I found you and Josh straight away. But I think for a little while too, I got Stevie, it kind of turned into meeting a group of people that turned out to not be healthy for me. So I kind of like, by the first year, I kind of reevaluated friendships, that like really knew who my true friends were as well by that point. But I then also fell sick with a chronic sinusitis, which led me to a year and a half of post-nasal drip on the vocal cords, which would make me lose my voice. And I ended up having to have 2 operations. But throughout that process, I got down to my last $150. It was done. Like I was going to have to go back to Australia. I was going to have to get my operations done in Australia. And, I was 3 a.m. in the morning one night and I'm calling my dad. My dad and I had reconciled a relationship and I'm talking to him on the phone, crying my eyes out, saying, I don't have any more strength left in me. Like I am done. This is like 6 months of every 2 weeks having to cancel work for 2 weeks, only working half the year basically, because I couldn't sing and I kept getting laryngitis. But I called and I can only make an income from music in this country too on my visa restrictions. So that was what was hard. I would have Ubered, I would have done anything if I could have. And my dad said, just keep swinging. You're so strong. Don't give up. And that night I ended up opening a book. It was a devotional book, a Christian devotional book. It was the 3rd page. I bought it and I'm like, I'm not into Christian devotionals. This isn't my thing. So I put it down. And page 3, I opened it up and it said, I just felt called to open it that night. And it said a story about the author feeling a calling in her to pack up her things and move. So she threw everything in the trunk of her car. And she said, it's not like I moved from a small town half a world away. I just kept driving north from Georgia until I saw the iconic skyline of Nashville. And I was like, this is weird. And she said, I just said the next yes, did the next thing, and God created a life for me in Nashville I couldn't have dreamed of. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's my sign. That's my sign. I need to, if anything right now, the only thing I have power over is that to have faith that I'll be okay, that I'll make it through this. And I went through that whole devotional book and I went and saw a doctor who ended up offering me 2 sinus surgeries for free.
Wow.
So Yeah.
and that's a pretty big deal in the US where
Oh yeah.
medical expenses can get pretty crazy.
I think it would have been someone said to me one day that they thought it would have been over $12,000 worth of operations. Yeah.
It's crazy to think.
So it is, isn't it? So, and then it's funny. Then I met Steve, and and as I said, I always need to have those male role. I need to have a male protector in my life, whether it's a friend, whether it's a brother, whatever it is. It's like this. I always imagine myself as a bird. I feel like I'm a pretty innocent person. I'm pretty naive. If someone tells me something, I'll believe them with my whole heart. And I think that I can also be taken advantage of or disappointed or let down because of that. So I always imagine myself as a bird. And when I was single, a single woman, it would be like I'd be on my perch and I'm too afraid to fly away because just my perch is hard enough to stay safe from predators, But whereas now I see Steve as a bird cage, and here's the bird cage, and I feel safe on my perch now, and I'm allowed to fly out and experience the world, but I know that I'm safe. I can always sleep at night, and I'm safe and I'm secure. So and that's the role I think that men for me play. I'm totally a strong woman, and you know, I wouldn't say a feminist, but I believe in the power of a woman. But I think it takes a strong man to make a woman as well.
You talking about the whole like need for a big brother kind of thing also brings another story back to my mind of how when we initially met, I remember that I was introduced to you through a mutual friend of ours who's actually from Northern Ireland called Johnny Brady. He's an incredible country artist in his own right. He's a really great writer and just an unbelievable entertainer. I have the utmost respect for Johnny. I love him as a person. He's become a really dear friend. And I'm delighted that he introduced me to you.
I'm so delighted.
I think that he had written with you before I actually went out on a writing trip. And I remember that writing trip that I went out on. I think I had actually booked it to go to Nashville for 3 weeks. And it was literally just after my marriage had fallen apart. And I remember feeling at the time like just really lost, having lost this relationship that I had been in for over 11 years at that point.
Wow.
And my life had really become consumed with the marriage, and my friendship circle had been kind of confined to my family and my ex-wife's family. I'd lost touch with a lot of my friends, and I wasn't really close with an awful lot of people back home. And I remember being able to get away to Nashville to write, and it just feeling like such an escape for me. And I do remember when we met, I think the very first day that we got together to write, we were writing in Jason and Jewel Coburn's house, who run 1111 Publishing over in Nashville. And I remember just feeling like it was like the middle of the afternoon, like we were just hanging out in the living room and we were talking through our experiences. I was probably telling you a little bit about my marriage falling apart and all of that stuff. And I just remember feeling like there was this pretty deep connection for whatever reason. And it's only happened with a handful of people throughout the course of my life, where there's something about the openness that certain people have whenever you first meet them that for me, it just makes me feel immediately connected to them in a very real and very deep way. And I remember having that feeling that first day that we wrote together. And I remember us going out to a gig maybe a few nights later, and it was at a venue called Peyton Steaks. It was a gig called Peyton Steaks Live, which a friend of ours runs in an apartment complex called Peyton Steaks in Nashville. And I remember we were hanging out. It's kind of like this little like So Far Sounds kind of living room gig vibe. And we were hanging out at the gig. I think it was maybe between acts or it was at the end of the night or whatever. But I hopped onto the sofa beside you. And I remember I put my arm around you and I was talking to you about how I had felt this connection. And I was in such dire need of friends at that moment in time. And I just really needed people to be there for me and to kind of helped me through this like emotional turmoil that I was finding myself in. Even though I didn't fully understand just how deep that turmoil was at the time, I knew that I needed people like you in my life. And I remember I put my arm around you and I was telling you about how strongly I felt about you as a friend. And I said, like, I had that feeling that it was like I was almost like a big brother. And I remember at the moment when we were having that conversation and we were deep into this, I remember you were living with Chris Bradley at the time, who again is a mutual friend of ours, is friends with many people in our friend circle. I remember Chris coming over, and I think Chris was pretty drunk, in fairness to her at the time, but she came over and she literally turned around to me and said, "Get your fucking hands off my friend." And I was like, no, you don't know what's going on here. You don't
He
know
was
what's
on
going
fire
on.
that night.
She was on fire. She was one of those protectors in your life, and she didn't want anyone taking advantage of you, even though I was just over here trying to be the big brother. There was really nothing else behind it other than just wanting to let you know how important that connection actually was to me.
Do you know, I think back and I think back to that time and I think we were both probably pretty broken people, really.
Absolutely.
You know, I just moved out from Australia. I'd only been there for a month or two. And, you know, I dated a guy in Australia just before I left. And I was going through that breakup, but also he was kind of like my best mate. So I moved out here, a breakup, and it was kind of turned into a pretty nasty breakup. So I lost my friend. I'm out here, and it felt like I was stuck out in space. It was like all of Australia slept until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you know. So it's like up until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was out on my own. I had to figure it out without any heart support, like any, you know, any life support. And I remember when you come into my life, now you're a Cancer, and I totally get cancers. Cancers are my people, particularly male cancers. My brother's a Cancer. My ex-fiance, he's a Cancer. And it's like I just get it, and there's that sense of brothership. And I think you and I unknowingly, but reflecting back now, I go, that's probably totally why we connected, is because I was your emotional support in that time, and you were my emotional support in that time. And it was special. It was special. I always say you're one of my best friends in Nashville that doesn't actually live in Nashville. You know, like you're one of my best Nashville friends. You know, so, and I think like there's a lot of people in my life that you know come and go, right? And I knew that you were going to be a lifelong friend, and it the same as like, you know, when Steve comes into my life. How important those big brothers or those relationships are. Like, I want you guys to be best friends too, you know, like that.
Yeah.
It's I got really lucky with you, Josh, and Alex. I got really lucky, and I'm so glad because you didn't meet Alex Jeffrey until a few years later. And I was so excited because you guys met at Key West, and like you guys are gonna love each other.
Yeah, I remember when I first met Alex, he picked us up in Fort Lauderdale. I think Josh and I
In a
had flown down.
convertible.
Yeah, I think Josh and I had flown down to Fort Lauderdale because it was cheaper to fly there than to fly into Key West directly. And Alex had come from, I think it was his aunt's house, and his aunt owned this convertible car. I can't remember the brand of it or whatever. I'm not really into cars, to be perfectly honest. But convertibles are always cool. Convertibles are always awesome. And Alex showed up in Fort Lauderdale, and I remember how you guys had all built up Alex so much to me. And Josh was saying like, "Oh, you're gonna love Alex. You're gonna think Alex is awesome. Alex is just such a great guy. I think
you pull up in a convertible really and you were like, what a wanker."
Yes, he literally. It was so funny, like the first hour. But in fairness to him, I think the thing was that, and I think we had this conversation actually after we first met, was that we had both been built up so much to each other. Where you had been building him up to me, Josh had been building him up to me, and likewise, you guys had been building me up to him. That whenever we first met, it was like, what do we even do here? Like, we're supposed to be such awesome people, and we're supposed to get on so well together, and yet there's all this pressure to be cool and to be awesome. And I remember thinking whenever we were driving down to Key West from Fort Lauderdale, I was like, this dude's just trying so hard. He's trying so hard to make me like him. Like, and that just puts me off. Like, why can he not just be normal? You know?
I love it.
But then eventually I got to see, we kind of relaxed around each other and we got to see each other for who we really were. And we realized that we both were awesome. And then we
Yeah,
became wonderful friends, which was really
I
nice.
love that. That is so
You guys were so right in thinking that. Um,
That's bloody funny.
so we've been really lucky in the fact that in our Nashville experiences, we've been surrounded by some pretty incredible people, and we've been lucky enough to cross paths with some really amazing people. But I think it's important to note too that being a writer in Nashville is pretty hard. And you know just as well as I know that it takes a lot of energy to come up with new songs all the time. And when I say new songs all the time, we're coming up with new songs all the time. There are a lot of people that we're surrounded by who are working this like a 9 to 5 job, even if they have another 9 to 5 job. They want it that badly that they just write and write and write and write. My question to you is, you've written hundreds of songs, I'm sure, in the time that you've been in Nashville now. How on earth do you manage to maintain the energy, and how do you continue to come up with the inspiration to keep writing songs?
Well, so something I particularly learned over COVID, and also that year when I was sick, not being able to sing meant I'd cancel my co-writes as well. So I couldn't. I that year for me, it was like I would write a little bit, but I think I wrote 75 songs that year when normally I'd write 170. So for me, it's like I've learned that, I think too, because I'm introverted, I know that being around people nonstop, like I think people like you, I can hang out. Is like you top me up. If I'm not with someone that doesn't top me up, I'm not saying that people, take my, well, it's just a different energy, I guess. But I feel physically exhausted. And then, because like, no, I'll be writing through the day, then I'll be gigging at night. And so I'm putting out energy at nighttime as well. It drains me. I can't do it. So I think for me, my whole total perspective and goals has definitely moved, particularly over COVID. But I look at it now and I go, quality is way better than quantity. So if I only write 75 songs a year, I'm totally okay with that. If I write 10 songs a year, I'm totally okay with that. But I want those 10 songs to be killer songs. So I think I know that if I go in a room and I write 5 days a week and I'm playing 3 to 4 times in a week as well, gigs, there's no way that I'm going to have enough in me to dig deep. It'll just be surface shit. And I could potentially just be spinning my wheels and wasting my time. So I try and make sure I normally only write about 2 to 3 times a week. Like this month, I've been writing way more. And I said to Steve, I said, I'm not going to write. Next month, I'm not going to write at all. My goal is to sit down. I really want to learn to play the electric guitar properly and dedicate time of practicing, learning, growing my skills. There's lots of other things I want to do. We're about to roll out a release schedule for my new songs coming out, and I just want to focus my creative energy on that. I get topped up from sitting at my computer. Steve normally films music videos and I edit them. So any kind of editing or creating, I love photography and Photoshop. That creative time on the computer where it's just me and the computer like tops me up. So I know I need that in my life, or even learning. Like I love to sit there and learn. So like how to build a website. So I do my own website work. I do all my own marketing. I just love it. Like anything like that, that tops me up. So I know that I need more of that time in my life. And I think it all contributes to, it's all music business. I'm just learning the business end of it or the marketing of it. And so I don't know if that actually answered your question, but for me, it's just like, I don't play that game anymore because it doesn't top me up. It just doesn't top me up. So
I think it's interesting. I think I found the same thing, where it's important to realize that your creative juices don't need to just flow in any one area. If you're a songwriter, it's important to look outside of songwriting, and it's important to look into other things, because when you start to just unlock your creativity in all aspects of life, it actually flows into every aspect of your creativity in life. I'm curious as well, though, when you're talking about being such an introverted person at your core, I know for me personally as a songwriter, a lot of my writing comes from a lot of personal experience, and you'll know this from the fact that we've written together a few times in the past. Where do you find your lyrical inspiration comes from when you sit down to write?
Well, I think like I'm a melody girl. I love melodies. Anything that's like I'm so inspired by melody. And that's always the first thing that comes. And if a great title hits me, even better. You know, throw me a title and I'll throw a melody to it straight away. And I find that I work best when I've got a really great lyricist in the room. And I also find that I work best if I've got a really great lyricist that knows my heart in the room. Someone who I really love. There's two men that I really love and adore in this town. Marty Morgan, who's one who you know Marty. He's a very emotive. Uh, how do I describe him? He's very special. I could tell him my whole heart. He can empathize. He's a very sensitive, emotive person. And then one of my all-time, hands down, I think he is the gem. Sorry, that's Eli. He is like a hidden gem in Nashville. His name is Jake Anderson, who did you know Jake at all? Have you met Jake?
I don't know Jake. I know you've mentioned him to me a number of times. I know that another mutual friend of mine here in Ireland has written with him a couple of times, and I hear great reports of him. I'm looking forward to finally meeting him at some point.
Who's the mutual friend that wrote with him?
I have a feeling it was my friend Clodagh Lawler had written with him, and I can't remember how Clodagh came across him initially, but I'm pretty sure that Clodagh had a couple of songs that were co-written with him that she released either as singles or on an EP that she put out a year or two ago. But yeah, I hear great things about Jake, and I know you've always spoken very highly of him.
Yeah, well, you know, he also comes from the Americana world, which I totally like. That's my world as well. But I love more pop melodies, and also too, this sounds really, I don't know how to say this any other way, but I kind of think I'm probably a little bit too pretty to be taken seriously in the Americana world. I know that sounds really, I look like a pop girl, or I look like do you know what I mean? Like I'm not alternate enough looking.
You've got to have that gritty. You've got to have that grittiness when you're in Americana music. You've got to have that.
Yeah, you know, I don't wear kind of hipster hats, and I'm not. I like to look polished and pretty.
I don't know. I remember stealing one of your hipster hats a couple of years ago, and I loved it. I regretted giving it back to you again.
It's so funny. I actually got it right there. I've been wearing it with when it's raining. It's my rainy day hat.
You're more of a hipster than you give yourself credit for.
Well, but I always feel like, you know, I'm not cool enough to be a part of Americana scene, you know, like, but because I come from, you know, in Australia, I think it's much like Ireland, where it's very much folk inspired. You know, we've got that folk or that rootsy, organic inspiration. And because he comes from that world and that realm, I love all his music. I'm his biggest fan. He's written so many great songs that I just go, oh my gosh, Jake, that's incredible. And then, you know, but teed with my melodic pop melodies, I love catchy melodies. Like I want a bop that's going to be catchy. And so his like heart lyrics, like that talks about the truth and honesty and organic things, teed up with my melodies, it's my favorite. So I love working with Jake. He is incredible, but I think it does take someone who knows your heart. I think I sit in rooms all the time where you're sitting with a writer that writes 5 days a week, and it's just like, yeah, that sounds good. Keep moving along because I've got to get done by 1:00 because I've got another songwriter to go to. And it's kind of almost like I've been in rooms like that where I don't feel valued. Almost, it's like, I don't know if it's my ego as an artist, but I sort of feel like, oh, we're not getting, there's no heart in it, if I could say that. And so I find that like I normally just don't write with those people again. I just think we're on different pages. They're looking for the big hit on Billboard, which I think it would be awesome to do that as well. But I also think it needs to be a dang good song, you know, and I think that comes from a place of authenticity.
Absolutely. I think I've realized over the years, and I haven't done nearly as much co-writing as you have, but I have done my fair share. And the thing that I've come to realize is that when I go into a co-write, I need to spend a lot of time actually sitting and chatting with the person and getting to know them and getting to know where they're at in their life. Because ultimately what I'm looking for is this like common thread that is running through both of our existences, that somehow we can bring the two threads together in order to create this new thing out of that. And we can start to weave this new fabric or whatever it is. And I think it's so important, like being able to find that like symbiosis or whatever it is, the energy that the two of you are experiencing at that one moment in time. That's what I'm always trying to capture, is that moment. I'm looking for something that just defines that, where my head was at in those 3 or 4 hours in that writing session. And it's interesting because we've written together, I guess, a handful of times now, maybe 4 or 5 times. And you're one of the few people that I actually can remember having been in sessions with where you literally turn around and say, I'm just not feeling it. Like I've been gigging a lot this week. I'm really tired. I had a late night last night. I just got back from Louisville, Kentucky. I just got back and I've had a long drive and I'm really tired and my head's just not in it. Do you mind if we don't actually write? Like, can we just hang for a few hours? And I think it's so important. I've been in writing situations with people before where I've felt that exact same way. And sometimes I've expressed that to people and people struggle to just take a step back and accept the fact that they're not going to have something to show for it at the end of the session. And sometimes you can kind of power through the sessions and try and force something to happen. But the reality is that the best stuff always comes when you're not trying to make it come at all, which is a really funny thing.
Well, I think too, just because we're such good mates, I probably wouldn't be so. I've been through in rights where I felt like that, and I know it's like I had nothing really to give, but I was trying, you know. And we leave with a song that I look and I go, gosh, I wasted my day. I probably should have spent my day recharging, you know, rather than doing that. And I think you and I are such good mates that like for us to go, let's go have a drink instead, or let's go out for lunch, let's hang out. Whereas like, because I am such an introverted person, I need someone like you that can top me up and give me a real connection, not like something authentic. And so Eli's just coming in and say hello baby. I need something like that. So I know that if I'm not feeling if I just feel like I've got nothing left in me, what I really need to do is be alone, right? But the thing is that I know you and I know that you top me up. So I know that we could go and hang out and whatever, and we'll get recharged and spend time together and have a good time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas like, I think in other situations, I know that me to say that to other people and, I committed to hanging out with them till 4:00. I'm probably better off to just sit there and try and slug out a song that we don't necessarily use, because no matter what I do, it's not going to top me up. And I wouldn't feel comfortable to say, oh, I'm not feeling it today to someone that I didn't know as close as I know you, you know?
And of course, when you say, like, let's just not write and let's go for a drink or let's go and have some lunch or something, what you actually mean is let me force feed you Vegemite. As the Australian that I am, let me force feed you some Vegemite, even though I know that you're going to despise the taste of it. I think that you should try some of this because it revitalizes me and I love it so much. And therefore, you need to love it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Right?
Yeah.
Now you eat Vegemite every day for breakfast.
No, you're never going to convert me to Vegemite. It's one of the most horrible things I've ever encountered in my life.
I love it.
Tell me this, as we're kind of wrapping this whole thing up. We've talked many times over the years, and you've confided in me how much of a struggle it can be sometimes to pursue this dream of being a songwriter. There's a whole bunch of different things that weigh on all of us as creative people a lot of the time. You've gone through periods where I remember you telling me a story about that 90-day period where you were in the US and you were walking for 6 miles a day to get to and from your co-writes. You were eating toast for weeks on end, as you said. At one point, you couldn't actually afford to buy groceries at all. And I remember you telling me that Marty Morgan, our good mutual friend, actually offered to buy groceries for you.
He found out that he found out, I think he came to my house and he was looking through the house and he opened up the fridge and saw nothing in it. And he goes, "What are you eating?" I said, "I've got toast there. I've been eating toast." And on Tuesdays, I'd have tacos for $2 at a place I found. Um, and that's what I would have. It was like I did this trip and I couldn't afford it, like, but I just tried to make it happen. And I knew I was going to make sacrifices to do it. But yes, what was the rest of the story? Sorry, I cut you off.
I'm just curious. Sometimes this dream that we live can feel a bit like a nightmare. And I'm really curious because you have given up so much in your life. You literally sold everything you had in order to be able to move to Nashville. Once you got to Nashville, at times you were struggling to pay your bills. Once you were finding your feet and trying to get gigs with different places and all of that stuff, you've gone through so much struggle in the pursuit of this dream. Still, I know to this day that you talk about how easy it would be to just pack your bags and go home again.
Yeah.
What is it that keeps you going? Why do you keep chasing it?
I think there's a few things. I actually have a song called Songwriter that I wrote with Jake Anderson that is the heart of who I am. I'll share it with you one day. It's the most proudest song I've ever written. And it starts off by saying, maybe I should just give up, wrap it up and move on home. Throw it in a dusty box where baseball gloves and dead dreams go. And I think about music and I think about this journey as sometimes as a curse. I hate it. I hate that I've been cursed with this calling. I feel like it's a calling. And I feel like every time I go to give up, I do. I get to the point of wanting to give up, wanting to pack up and go home. And then something happens. Something happens to tell me you can't give up just yet. Just a little bit of hope, and I think about even meeting Steve. Now my boyfriend is my producer, and I remember meeting Steve downtown in a bar in Nashville, and I think about the pursuit of love even. And I was 3 weeks from going home to Australia, and I see Steve across the dance floor, and it was a weird meet, like our eyes kind of locked, and we caught each other's stare and gaze for a little moment. And then I broke it because I'm like, oh my gosh, he's going to want to talk to me now. Oh, I don't want to talk to him, you know? And he came up and asked me out for dinner. And I thought, no guy's ever asked me out for dinner before. Normally they say, you want to have a drink or you want to catch up. So I thought, well, I'm going to say yes. And I even think about like every element of even the Nashville journey. Every time I thought it's done, I was actually going home to Australia because I wanted to escape the winter here, because in wintertime my sinuses get really bad. And I didn't want to go through what I went through the previous year. And that was chronic laryngitis. I had just had my operations in that September, and we're now in November at that point. So I was still recovering, still struggling vocally. I was still healing internally here, and I met Steve 3 weeks before flying out. We went on a few dates, and I flew home to Australia. Now I was the worst I've ever been back home in Australia. I could not talk for a month. And I remember would get on FaceTime to Steve and I would message him on like iMessage. We weren't officially dating. And I don't know if I would have came home, to be honest, back then. I don't know if I would have came back to Nashville. I was so afraid to get on that plane and not know how to make my money in a country where I have to rely on my voice to sing. And it's just like that, then I meet Steve. I had a reason to come back here. He actually ended up flying out to see me in Australia, asked me to be his girlfriend. And he said, come home. keep you safe. You don't have to do this alone anymore. And I came here, and it's just like one of those things where it is tough, but I think the chorus of the songwriter is, it's a long road of hard nose, hitting highs and feeling uninspired. It's a tightrope, a flat broke, and buying midtown shots when you're on fire. It's burning out and giving in. It's waking up to try again. Songwriter. And it's the only thing I've ever known. It's like you doubt yourself, you get pushed down, you get knocked down, but something keeps roping me back in every time I think I'm going to quit. And I also do think, I think something for me is that, like, I always thought you had to be a struggling musician to make it. You know, I've read the stories of Keith Urban. I've read the stories of those musicians that really did it hard. And I think, to be honest, I probably somehow willed that into my life, and thinking that, no, I need to go through this to deserve it, you know? And I think I'm past the point of thinking like that. I think, no, I fucking deserve it. You know, I deserve a break. I've worked for it. I've starved for it. I think I deserve it now. And I think now I'm not going to think of myself as a struggling musician. And I actually went into 2020 with that headspace. And 2020 was one of the most, as devastating as it was, and as heartbreaking as it was, and having to pivot, I made it through 2020. You know, I made it through 2020, and I go, that was not the hardest year I've ever been through. That was quite easy. And not just that, it's like it led me to creating music and led me on my path even more than all the other years of distractions and trying to thinking I have to make ends meet. Making less money in 2020 gave me the ability to create music and do the things I've been wanting to do, you know? So it's kind of interesting, but I do think I probably willed a lot of that hardship into my life without knowing it.
Creating music is such an interesting thing, and I think in particular being a songwriter is such an interesting thing, because taking out the kind of production side of things altogether, the beauty of songwriting is that you can literally walk into a room, pick up a guitar, sit down at the piano, and 10, 15 minutes later, an hour later, 2 hours later, 4 hours later, whatever it is, you have some completed product. You have finished something that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
And there's something so magical and something so special about that. There's a line in one of your songs, 25 cents in the ashtray, that I really love. And I think it's in the second verse of the song, I think, where you talk about, if I wake up with a song, then I'm going to be the richest girl around.
Yeah.
And there is something about it where it's such a fulfilling journey, even though it can be so difficult to create a career, to make a living, to make money in order to sustain it. There is something so enriching about having that gift of being able to put your thoughts and feelings and emotions into words and to melody that just feels so rewarding. It's like one of those priceless things in life that never grows old. It doesn't matter whether the song is actually, whether it has hit song potential or whether it's going to be a smash or whether it's never going to hear the light of day. The reality is that once you finish that thing, once you put a full stop at the end of that song, no matter how good or bad that song is, you're able to stand back and say, I just made something from nothing, and that's special.
Yeah. I think it's definitely, look, for all the times that I look at Nashville or this dream and I think it's a curse, I always, and particularly that song 25 cents in the ashtray, you know, it was about being broke. It was about driving to Memphis for the very first time, not knowing if I'd make enough money to even pay for gas to get me home, you know. But there was nothing else on that weekend, and I thought I'd take a risk. It could lead to great things, and it sure did. I've been going out to Memphis every 6 weeks since I moved here, apart from last year. But, you know, I think about that and I go, there's so many people who wish they maybe pursued the dream of songwriting or their dream, whatever that may be. But we're too afraid to if too afraid of the financial risks or the lack of security, it's definitely, I think, it's a makes you tough, you know, doing what we do, and it does. It comes with glitz and glamour, and it's wonderful for the 5 minutes. But like, it looks wonderful from the outside looking in, but from the inside looking out, it's not near as much reward for the amount of time that's put out. But I can't remember where I'm actually going with this, but you know, I do think I feel very blessed. I have to remind myself that like there's so many people, particularly kids in Australia, that look up to me and go, "Wow, she's doing it." But they don't know. They don't know that I go, "Gosh, you know, I don't even know if I can afford a ticket to get back home to Australia to see my mum. You know, I don't know if I could. I don't know when I'll be able to release again because it costs money to release. You know, and it's kind of like all those things. Like it's people from the outside look at it and it's amazing. And I always have to kind of sit back and remind myself there's someone out there who wishes they were where you were. And so I can't ever take it for granted, although there is times where it's bloody hard.
I'm so grateful for you taking the time to sit down and speak to me. I have traveled the world over the past few years, and I have gotten to meet some really incredible people in my travels, some incredibly talented people that have inspired me and encouraged me along the way. You have been one of those people, and out of anyone that I have met, there are really only a handful that have really struck me, that there's just something about them that makes me say, I don't know what it is, but that person has it. And anytime that I've ever sat down to write with you, anytime that we've just gotten to hang out, that has always struck me. And
Aww,
I'm so
yes.
grateful to be able to have somebody like you in my life and be lucky enough to call somebody like you a friend. Not only a friend, but somebody that I actually get to work with and collaborate with along the way. I have no doubt that incredible things lie ahead for you. And I can't do anything but encourage you to fight off that doubt and that worry, because I can see that something big lies ahead.
Yeah, it's so crazy. I look at so many up and coming artists, and I was working with someone recently. I do a thing called Rent a Write, where throughout COVID and throughout the 2020, I still am offering co-writes with people who you know want guidance and learn how to write songs, or it's like new writers or up and coming artists that want to work with me. And so I've been offering this service, and there was this one girl that actually even recently there's been two girls I've worked with that have really low self-esteem, and they're too afraid to speak up or say a line because they're so afraid if it's going to be good enough or whatever it may be. And I can always see the potential in someone else, and I can always go, girl, you don't have to worry about what I think. If you don't have to worry about, you are perfect, you're amazing, just do what you do. But it's so hard to see it for myself at times, you know. But, you know, I think it's always a work in progress. And I think that this whole journey, and I do think too, for someone who started off, you know, I'm getting better with my self worth. And I think too, having more stability in my life, having a partner in my life that can, you know, having my little bird cage, you know, surrounding me and keeping me safe, I feel like I'm a lot more braver to go out and believe in myself and things like that. But it all just takes time. But I do think I find it so ironic that a little girl that, you know, always had issues of thinking she never had any friends at school to then wanting, you know, the world to love my music, or you know what I mean, like it's funny that that's my challenge but also my dream, right?
Yeah.
So, but it's cool. It's been a fun adventure, and I love it. I wouldn't trade it for the world, but sometimes I definitely want to curse it.
Well, I'm going to tell you now, I think that you absolutely 100% need to stick with it. I think that you're completely right in feeling like it is your calling in life. And I feel like, just as you said, there's something that keeps you going. There's something that makes you feel like if you just stick with it, that God's got something pretty good ahead for you. And I 100% agree with that. In any of the times that I've ever sat down with you and worked with you or just got to hang out with you, you have such a unique energy. You're so fun and so bubbly, and you always bring something. I don't even have words for it, quite honestly. There's just this thing. Sometimes you sit down with certain people, and from the very outset, they just attack the process with such vigor, and just the first thing that falls out of their mouth is so inspiring to hear, whether that's a lyric or a melody. There's just something about it that's more special than a lot of the other things that you hear fall out of other people's mouths. I think that you've got that thing, and I encourage you to stick with it despite all the doubt and the lack of self-worth sometimes that you can feel. I know that incredible things lie ahead for you. I know that for anyone who has listened to the entirety of this podcast, if you go and check out Katrina's music, you'll hear how exceptionally talented she is, not only as a singer, not only as an artist, but particularly as a songwriter. And I just know that there's some song is going to get picked up by Keith Urban or God knows who.
Be amazing, wouldn't it?
In the next few years, that is going to have the credit of Katrina Burgoyne on it. I can almost guarantee that. And if that doesn't happen, all remaining faith that I have in the music industry is going to evaporate, and I'm going to be horribly saddened. But I have a feeling that my instinct is right in saying that. Thank you so much for being here, Katrina. I really appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat to me. It has completely renewed my sense of respect and admiration for you as a person. And I'm really glad that other people are going to have the opportunity to see just how incredible and awesome you are. I am so lucky to have you as a friend. And I really appreciate you sitting down and taking the time to chat with me.
I love it. I've had a blast. Thank you. And it was like been way too long before since we've had a chat. So it's been amazing.
Absolutely. Agreed. For anyone who's still watching, please do check out kbcountry.net. Check out Katrina Burgoyne on Spotify and Tidal and all of those digital streaming platforms that everybody uses nowadays. Check out her music. I promise that you won't regret it. If you want to learn a little bit more about writing, or you have had an interest in poetry, or whatever it is, if you've just been thinking about getting into songwriting, I can't recommend Katrina highly enough. I'm sure that you can tell already that she's an incredibly open person. She's incredibly encouraging, and she is an unbelievable talent when it comes to writing. There is no one better that you could possibly learn the art of songwriting from than Katrina Burgoyne. Head over to kbcountry.net. Check out some of her music on Amazon, Spotify, all of those digital streaming platforms. Katrina, thank you once again for being with me today. Thank you guys for tuning in and for listening. And we'll see you again sometime for another episode of Me and All My Friends.
Thank you, darling.
Thanks, guys.